Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Aaron LaFave of Wausau is a Democratic candidate in the 85th Assembly District. The primary is August 11th. Aaron, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having us.
Why don't you tell us first, what do you consider your top campaign issues, sir?
You know, the one issue that really kind of drove me to get involved this year was the redistricting process that we're going to see, in the next session. I was really, really unhappy with the way that it fell out 10 years ago. It was an unfair, unjust, and frankly, embarrassing result. And we spent millions of taxpayer dollars trying to fight the result of it. And there is huge support this time around for a nonpartisan process. And I want to be part of that change. And so, again, I felt I had to step up and have our voice be heard. And again, if I had to narrow our campaign down to one single issue, I would like to make the redistricting process fair so that we have, fair results and a fair legislature for the next decade. And again, it impacts us for 10 years. So I think that's really an issue we absolutely have to get right this time.
So you like the governor's proposal for a People's Commission or the Iowa plan, correct?
I do. I think the Iowa plan is pretty strong, and again, it's proved effective over a long period of time. And so, pragmatically, I think that deserves some strong consideration. I know there's alternative plans out there as well to maybe let the districts be drawn from the bottom up, so localities have a lot more say into their own district lines. Again, I'm not sure exactly which one is the best, but it needs to be a nonpartisan process and out of the hands of the legislatures. It's not fair for the people being elected to then draw their own lines to pick the people who will elect them again. I mean, that's just undemocratic at its core. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to some other specific issues. If the governor's right and the pandemic is going to mean we don't collect $2 billion with a B in state tax collections, if you're in the assembly, the choice may be, do you cut spending or do you raise taxes or fees?
Yeah, and it's a big number, right? And so you probably can't do it all with one side or the other. I think we are going to have to, in the short term, try to insulate our most critical programs and agencies and maybe minimize the cuts that they have to receive, if any. And again, there might have to be some new alternative revenue streams coming in, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But that does, in a lot of cases, mean new taxes. $2 billion is a huge number, obviously. It does, account for about 5% of our annual budget right now. And so while it's extremely significant, it's also not falling off a cliff. And so we don't want to cut too hard and impact our economy negatively. So I think we've got to look at that carefully, especially over the next 2 years. But what we really need to do in the slightly longer term, 2 to 5 years, is work on reviving our economy in a way that directly benefits workers and employees and their families. 86% of our general purpose revenue comes from income tax and sales tax. And so getting the revenue to those working families not only helps, again, those people, but it directly feeds our state coffers. And so we need to revive our economy, but revive it kind of from the bottom up.
Well, let's stay on that for just 1 second. You mentioned some potential new revenue sources. Can you give me just one?
Yeah. So, and again, I was looking here at some of the other comments that were going around. Obviously, marijuana legalization is a potential option, right? Looking at other states.
You would support both medical and recreational.
I would, yes.
Okay.
I think as you look at that from a social standpoint, from a financial standpoint, states like Washington have seen, $300 million plus in additional tax revenues due to the legalization of marijuana. And so, clearly not $2 billion, but it's a huge hit for us financially if we were to do that. And again, that's before you even look at some of the other financial impacts in terms of, reduced incarceration and correction, costs, because we'll have those, have less people being incarcerated. Again, we can perhaps reallocate our police and law enforcement to be tracking down violent crimes or property crimes or things that are a higher value. And statistically, legalization in other states has shown that there's a higher closure rate of other law enforcement issues once we've taken, the marijuana issue out of their domain, so to speak.
Okay. Americans know a lot more than we did 2 months ago about how some police officers treat those in custody. The governor's recommended a 9-bill package of police reforms, ban chokeholds, ban no-knock warrants, and universal standards for training officers, those that want to become policemen. Do you support the governor's package, or do you think it should go further, Aaron?
So that's a good question. I mean, I do think I support this package. We also need to understand that, again, our law enforcement officers have a very tough job, and you can't totally, we can't handicap them. But I feel that the package that's proposed protects the rights of people that are in custody or being taken into custody while still allowing the law enforcement officers to do what they need to. So again, I think it's pretty good, and it's a start, and I'm happy to see a start. I want us to take some action on this right now and not push it off any further. And it's something we need to keep looking at. If we find that it's not going far enough to protect people in custody, well, then we need to go back and revise it. But I'm in favor of taking some steps right now.
Okay. 2 questions on property taxes. Wisconsin, sure. Unfortunately, is some of the highest property taxes in the nation, which is why what school districts and local governments can levy in property taxes is capped or limited, although referendums, you can exceed those limits. If you're a member of the assembly, would you vote to continue those the property tax caps or limits, or get rid of them?
Yeah, so there's obviously a balance here, right? We need to collect revenue, but we also need to be fair to the taxpayers, and we can't price people out of their homes. We are, as you say, in the top 10 nationwide for both a percentage of income and a percentage of home value in terms of property tax. But when you really look at the tax package, we also have to take in income tax, sales tax, excise taxes, and they all work together. I feel that at the moment, again, we see referenda passed all the time, approving increases of those limits. And so I think that the model that we have is working right now. Again, there's a limit to try and keep it from going too high, but there's also a way where localities have control over themselves. And if they want to, and there's popular sentiment to increase those limits and increase taxation in that case, that it's approved. So I think it's working at the moment, although again, it's something we need to keep an eye on so we don't let property tax get out of hand.
Well, I want to parse that a little bit. Given the reliance on the property tax for local governments, do you see any need for alternative revenue options? For example, broadening the 5% state sales tax to some now exempt products and services? Or how about this, giving local governments and not just counties the ability to levy a half-cent sales tax?
Yeah, so in terms of, again, the total tax picture, we definitely should be looking at alternative revenue streams. We do have a slightly lower sales tax than a lot of our neighboring states. And so again, as we look at balancing property tax, income tax, sales tax, excise tax, maybe we do need to look at shifting things. And again, I'm very much in favor of allowing localities to have some autonomy over themselves. And so again, allowing a half-cent sales tax to the locality, I think makes a lot of sense. And again, as you look at it in the scheme of kind of the Midwest, it doesn't put us above where the other states are. So it's not like we're getting out of whack from that perspective. There's, some other additional alternative revenue streams that we might consider, taxing polluters and companies who are adversely affecting our environment. And again, that might have to be done at the state level, but could be funneled back to localities to help offset property taxes or other things. So
a couple questions on the pandemic. It not only hits local economies and the state economies, it puts a strain on healthcare providers that state government relies on. If you're in the assembly voting on the next state budget, do you think hospitals, and we've seen them on the front line in the pandemic fight, do you think hospitals deserve a greater priority than they may have had in the current state budget?
Yeah, I think that, this pandemic is not going away. And so absolutely over the next couple of years, we need to continue to support our healthcare system and find a way to get them the tools that they need to combat the pandemic, right? Even if I would consider us extremely fortunate and we get a vaccine sometime in 2021, but it's probably not going to be able to stamp out the pandemic, at least until the end of the year. And that's unfortunate, but we absolutely need to look at supporting hospitals, up until the point when we really get it under control. And again, there's always the possibility here that we can't bring it under control with a vaccine due to the way that it's mutating and changing, and it could be a yearly thing. So yes, we definitely need to consider healthcare as one of those critical elements that we need to insulate from a lot of the budget issues that are going around right now. You're right. It's absolutely a catch-22. I mean, we're having lower revenues and lower economic activity. And at the same point, we probably need to make an investment in healthcare so that, again, we don't end up with a cyclical lower economic activity in the future.
Well, another COVID question. If a business follows all the safety and health precautions recommended by the WEDC or the CDC, should we pass a law saying they cannot be sued by perhaps a customer or an employee who may feel that they got COVID by entering or working for that business? Yeah.
So I am a small business owner, and I don't have people come into our store, but I'm certainly sympathetic that we have small and medium businesses who are in a very, very tough spot with the pandemic, right? Some of them are essential and we need them open. And even if they're not financially, they probably can't afford to stay closed. And, right. So if they're following the guidelines as well as they can, if they're really making an earnest effort to keep their employees and their customers safe, then I do think we have to protect them in turn. I mean, the pandemic is an extraordinary situation, which, is unparalleled. And if we're doing everything we can to keep our customers and our employees safe, there's a certain amount of liability that we have to protect them from. And again, in terms of keeping our economy going, I think that yes, we probably should. Now, we do all have a responsibility to mitigate the pandemic. And so that law only extends so far as they are doing 100% or more of what they need to be doing. And certainly if they are not doing those things, then I think they've opened themselves up to a certain amount of liability.
For years, we've debated to find a stable way to pay for our highways. Last year, the governor recommended an increase in the gas tax, which is 30.9 cents per gallon. It's not been raised in more than 10 years. Could you vote to raise the gas tax for a stable source of highway funding, Aaron?
Yeah, I think the fact that we had it and it was not changed and not indexed to inflation or anything like that has certainly eroded the power of that particular tax. For most things, we need to be planning for a sustainable solution. And so if we decide that our gas tax need to be raised a little bit, I think we should raise it and then index it so that it stays with the economy. And again, we won't be in this situation 10 years from now where we have to revisit, the poor state of our roads. Let's put a solution in place where we solve the issue and we set a status quo that lets us maintain it for the future.
Okay, new subject. When local governments contemplate or authorize public works projects, should there be standards or requirements in place giving preferences to Wisconsin companies? Here's why I ask. A study found in 2015, out-of-state contractors were awarded $72 million in contracts, but that more than doubled to $146 million by 2018. So should local governments have to give a preference to Wisconsin companies?
I think a preference, yeah. And again, we want the best outcome for our taxpayer dollar. And if there's an out-of-state company that can do something that we can't do here in state, absolutely they should have the freedom to select who they need to select. But preference for a Wisconsin company, definitely. Let's keep those taxpayer dollars right here in the state. We'll recirculate them. We'll pay them to our state. We'll collect the tax dollars on them, and we'll funnel them back into our state. And it's kind of a multiplying effect if you look at it that way. So definitely we should have a strong preference for staying local when we can.
Two final questions. We've touched on a lot of issues. Is there any issue central to your campaign that we haven't touched on yet that you want to mention?
No, I think we've touched on a lot of them. I'm really trying to get our constituents more engaged in the political process. And so again, I would like to have everybody be informed on these issues and an open forum for them to have feedback and say in the process as we go along. It can't just be every 2 years or 4 years when we go through an election cycle. People need to stay, engaged and educated and have a say into these things along the way, rather than just every so often when it's time for an election. So.
Then finally, you want to highlight differences with your opponent in the primary?
Yeah, so for good or bad, my opponent and I are pretty significantly different. He is a career politician. He's been involved in local politics for a long time. I'm not shy about saying I'm a first-time politician. I'm a business owner, and this is my first foray into the political scene. And so I'm hoping that I bring a significantly new perspective to the table, and certainly don't intend to or expect to do things the way that maybe they've been done for a long time. And I've also, I'm a significantly different generation than both the primary opponent and the incumbent. And so again, I'm hoping that that separates me a bit and lets me look at the issues in a way that maybe they haven't been looked at in a long time.
I'm just curious, what type of small business do you have, Aaron?
We do software for the transportation industry. And so actually the pandemic has been pretty disastrous for us. We're looking forward to hopefully getting back to normal pretty soon.
Thank you. Aaron LaFave of Wausau, is a Democratic candidate in the 85th Assembly District. The primary is August 11. Aaron, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Steve, thank you so much for having me. Have a good day.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.